Tonight's agenda, we're going to go ahead and jump straight into the presentation this evening. I'm going to hand it over to our presenters here shortly to give a little intro and get into the reason why you're here today. And then, like I said, we're going to save some time at the end of the presentation for a little bit of Q&A. So if we don't get your question answered in the chat, like throughout the portion of the presentation, we'll come back around to that and do some live Q&A at the end. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over today to our expert presenters, Jen and Jennifer. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Hopefully my audio is okay here. You can give me a thumbs up. Great, thanks. My name is Jen Ehlert, and thanks for joining us tonight. It's always so nice to learn of all the folks interested in establishing pollinator plantings, and we appreciate your presence here and your time with us tonight. We're really excited to talk to you about ways that you can get your Lawns to Legumes project started. With that, I help run our Metro Blooms Design and Build program. So we are part of the nonprofit Metro Blooms. We do design and installation work, and I'm a registered landscape architect in Minnesota. And then Jennifer, I'll let you introduce yourself because you are taking our first section to present.
All right. Hi there. My name is Jennifer Moeller. I am Director of Neighborhood Projects and also a landscape designer at Metro Blooms. And yeah, I've been here a few years, but looking forward to talking to you all this evening. All right, we'll jump right in. Assessing your site. So with your Lawns to Legumes projects, the most important piece is going to be knowing your site and what to start with. Everybody's property is going to be a little bit different. And as some examples here show, you can do many different types of projects. So in this case, you see kind of conversion in the boulevard area. And so we can dive into kind of how this person arrived at that project. So first, you're going to start with making a base map. That means you're finding your essential pieces of your property that are going to inform what is going to be your opportunities for new landscape ideas. So easy way to start is grabbing an aerial. You can go to your Hennepin County GIS mapping tool if you know about that one. That's the example down at the bottom here for their interactive maps. You can use a Google map, or you can also just draw by hand, like what this photo shows. All methods work, but we'll go more into detail about a base map, but it essentially is going to give you a jumping point for your project. So biggest piece is going to be your structures, things that are not going to move. So you want your house, any impervious surfaces like your walkways, your patios, sidewalks, streets, even, where all of those are in conjunction with each other. And especially like retaining walls. Retaining walls will also influence how all of your different opportunities can come together. Another big piece is utility lines, and we'll jump into more specifics on that a little later too. Next piece would be hydrology. It informs a lot of what will thrive in your property. So various different plants have various different needs. And so knowing where your water is flowing on your property, how is stormwater running off, escaping and draining? How is it pooling? Is there erosion? All of those pieces are really good to include in your base map. Some of the approaches we have as landscape designers and architects is using some of the acronyms that you see on the right there. High point, or HP, is the places that water is going away from. And then low points is where it might be collecting. And then downspout, DS, we'll use that acronym a lot for wherever your gutters are coming down and creating a pooling opportunity. So a lot of big points where you'll usually see them. We then after those high points and low points, dial in by those fun little arrows. Where is that water flowing from all of those high points and low points? From there, it's really good to know which existing vegetation pieces are going to remain as well. So if you have trees that are, huge pieces in your landscape, hedges, shrubs, anything like that, that will create a drip line or a canopy for you, all of those pieces will create and inform what your new project might look like. It's really good to mark where your existing edges are too for your beds. And that way on your base map exactly how much area you're going to be adding on. And then from there, sun and shade. Take some time to go out with your cup of coffee or your tea and see what your sun is doing or your shade is doing over the course of the day. And even, as we start in the beginning of the year, it'll change over the year as well. So if you have time to do that observation over the course of our seasons, that will also inform how much sun will affect the plants that you introduce later. If you have the opportunity to pop out morning, lunchtime, and late afternoon, those are always really good times to start with. And then start just making little notes on your base map to keep you well organized as you go. And then finally, with all the information you've collected, start considering how you use your space. That is, a big piece of what you want to think about as you start introducing new things. You don't want to trample your new little garden bed or have dogs running through or, things like that that can influence the success of your species over time. So your potential pollinator habitat, also how the stormwater management piece of it influences, whatever you'd like to include in this final synthesis point of your brainstorming. All of those pieces come together and create what you might think of as your next development of your property. So here's an example for you. Just kind of pulling all of those pieces together. This particular project had a lot of runoff coming from a driveway, and so that informed the placement of their new rain garden to kind of help filter and capture some of that runoff. All right, and with that, I'll turn it over to Jen.
Thanks, Jennifer. That's such good information, and I'm excited to talk to you all about kind of now that you know where you might put your project, or once you develop your project and you have an idea of what you're planning to do with this particular grant that you've got. Let's talk about how to pick the best plants, some of the things that might go into the mind of a designer when they're choosing plants for a project. We really want to share those with you to help you have the most successful project possible. First and foremost, it's great to see this image of our native plant roots. This is one of the reasons native plants can be really helpful in infiltrating additional runoff. So if you're going to be putting your native planting in a rain garden, for example, as Jennifer mentioned, and we'll talk a little bit about rain gardens a little later on and ways to design those. But the native plant roots that you see here are native prairie plants, have really deep roots, and those are really helpful in bringing that additional runoff deeper into groundwater and to clean it really as it moves through the soil surface. All these channels created by these roots are helping to really create that well-infiltrating soil. So not only do they do that, but these deep roots can, in a drought, access water that's deeper in the soil profile, helping them be more resilient in times of drought. So picking the right plants for the right place is really important, and it's just really fun to show you kind of what that looks like below ground, because we really appreciate the flowers and the grasses, but what's happening below ground with the roots can really attribute to the success of your project. It is important to notice on the very left those little turf grass lawn roots that are about 3 inches deep or less on the very left. So they're not contributing as much to kind of restoring organic matter in soil or bringing water deeper into the soil profile. They're requiring more water to survive, fertilizer and mowing. And so switching some turf to native plants is great for pollinator habitat, obviously, because that's what the Lawns to Legumes program is really supporting, but it also can reduce your inputs. So you're not needing to fertilize, mow, things like that. And we'll talk about that as we go through the presentation. Just to kind of talk a little bit more about those roots and how they re-engineer the soil, it's really cool. All those deep roots you just saw in that image we provided, every year about a third of plant roots die back in the wintertime. What that means is those plant roots decompose into organic matter in the soil. So actually in a lot of our urban soils, they might be a little devoid of organic matter just due to the amount of development that has occurred in urban areas over a long period of time. So those roots that die off add organic matter back into the soil and kind of begin to re-engineer the soil and reestablish healthy soils. We know that organic matter is also associated with increased soil microbiology. So having like soil fungi, soil microorganisms that are really healthy in our soils. So those plant roots start to bring those back in as well. They're also helping to retain soil moisture because organic matter helps to retain moisture in soil. And they're reducing some compaction. Those kind of air channels that are then created by the roots that have died off provide air into the soil. It can help deal with some of the compaction issues that we might have in areas where soils have been really built on or driven over or walked on for a long period of time. We like to consider kind of the stacked environmental benefits of native plants. So not only are they helpful in rain gardens in sort of helping to infiltrate additional runoff into the soil, but they're also providing habitat for pollinators. They're beautifying our community. They're adding organic matter into the soil. So you really get these like stacked benefits from this particular change from turf grass to a native planting, for example. It's really nice to then lead in and talk a little bit about soil health. We have some tips for kind of improved plant establishment via your soil health in your projects. It's good to think about that. You really want to create that groundwork for a healthy project and a successful Lawns to Legumes project. It is helpful if you know that your soil is compacted to do some decompaction of that soil. And I want to be very clear. I do not actually recommend that you rototill your soil. Rototilling can pulverize your soil to such a degree that any soil microorganisms and soil fungi have a really hard time living past that process. You can do successful decompaction with a shovel. You can simply turn the soil, take a rake to kind of break it up into bigger chunks, and that can be helpful in helping to kind of keep your soil microorganisms that are there alive. We don't want you to till and really kind of pulverize that soil till it's so smooth. Also, rototilling in clay soils, if it's at all wet, can create a hard pan underneath the rototill where your tiller really turns up the top layer 6 inches of soil, but underneath it, where the tiller scrapes that clay soil, it can create a layer that kind of smears and really reduces the ability for water to infiltrate through. So that's why we don't really recommend rototilling, especially in clay soils. So once you've kind of initially done a little bit of decompaction, you've just kind of taken your shovel, turned the soil over, loosened it a little bit, or some people take a pitchfork and kind of stab it into the soil and rock it back and forth just to add some like air into the soil in that way. You can add organic matter to your soil as well. That can be compost. That could come from your own yard compost. It can come from leaf compost. It can come from compost that you purchase. One thing that can be helpful is that you don't necessarily need to purchase a lot of manure-based compost. Manure-based compost does have a lot of nitrogen in it, which can leach. And so leaf compost, mushroom compost, things like that are great additions to the soil for compost. Of course, if all you have is manure compost, great, that's okay too. Once you have your planting completed, for your soil, kind of minimize the soil disturbance after you've finished your project. You're really not trying to mess around in there too much so that your soil has a chance to get the soil fungal networks established. And we also recommend that once you do your planting, you keep your soil covered. Bare soil is really easy to erode. If we're going into spring, when we have really heavy rains, if we have bare soil, it can wash away very easily. So especially initially when your plants are small and there's a lot of space between these little baby plants that you've put in, put some mulch on top of your soil to help keep it covered and protected, especially in that establishment period. We really recommend something like a double shredded hardwood mulch, nothing chipped or that looks like it came off a 2x4. That tends to float and wash away really easy. A shredded mulch is going to be able to mat down and stay in place, retain moisture, and cool the soil really well. Okay. Next thing to move into is thinking about plant selection. So you're really wanting to consider your sunlight. Jennifer mentioned this already. I just want to give you a couple of guidelines on the sunlight recommendations for when you're looking through the mini plant lists that I know that you all are going to get and look at. Full sun is what we really consider more than 6 hours of direct sun. Part sun, part shade is 3 to 6 hours of sun. So it's a decent amount of sun. And full shade is less than 3 hours of sun. Now, one thing to consider is that if you're in an urban area, it is possible that you have a spot that is in shade all day from buildings, things like that. And then it gets 3 hours of hot afternoon sun from like 1 to 4. It's the hottest sun of the summer. That's probably, it may only be 3 hours of sun, but I'd probably consider that part sun, part shade, and have a few more sun tolerant plants there just because of the intensity of that afternoon sun. Just something to consider when you're taking that cup of coffee and tea and walking around and marking your sunlight. Soil moisture is another consideration, especially if you're planning to use your plants in a rain garden. So is your soil naturally wet or dry? You can go kind of stick your hand in it, see what it feels like on a day when it hasn't rained, see what it feels like on a day when it has rained. Does it dry really quickly? Just do a little of investigation. And that's really, if your soil just feels really kind of wet all the time, you might have a heavy soil that's pretty wet and you need to pick plants accordingly. One thing to consider for a rain garden is that, and that's what this picture is of. This is a rain garden that's capturing runoff from a parking lot. It's going down this stepped inlet to capture kind of sediment, and then the water goes into the basin. If it is raining, a rain garden can be quite wet. Rain gardens are designed to drain within 24 to 48 hours. And if it's not raining, a rain garden is going to be dry. So you should not necessarily pick wetland plants for a rain garden because they want consistent moisture. Rain garden is wet when it's raining, dry when it's not, and you need to be able to pick plants that withstand both wet and dry conditions. We call that mesic, and there are lots of plants that fit that category, so don't stress about that too much. In all the resources that are provided to you, there's some very clear rain garden plant lists. Just something to consider. Another thing to think about is plant height. Now, this one is kind of fun. You can use plant height in lots of ways. You may want really low growing plants. You might be planting on your boulevard. If you are planting in the boulevard, which is that space between the sidewalk and the street, then you should check your city's ordinance for plant heights within boulevards. Most cities do have a limit on the height of the plant within a boulevard. I believe within Minneapolis, it is 24 or 30 inches, and I shouldn't have that memorized. I'm sorry, I don't off the top of my head right this second. But you really want to preserve sight lines. So if a kid is walking on the sidewalk and runs into the street, we want cars to be able to see them so they can stop. So preserving those sight lines is why plants are not allowed to be too tall in the boulevard. However, you might want to place tall plants in some part of your yard to provide privacy screening. And then you want to pick the plants that are going to grow plenty tall, and some tall grasses and things like that. Some trees and some of our native shrubs are excellent for pollinators. And those can also provide privacy. And if they're a native species that's on the approved list, it can qualify for your Lawns to Legumes grant. One thing that I do want you to consider is that if you are putting these plants right next to a walkway, they can flop over a little bit. You can see some in this photo on the right. It's absolutely beautiful. And those liatris in the back of that photo are definitely blocking the walkway. So that's okay if that's okay with you, but if you don't like that, then put some of those taller plants a little bit farther away from your walkway. It can sort of be like the family photo, short folks in front, taller ones in the back. You can also use that as a design strategy when you're considering the design of your planting. There are two design styles that I want to tell you about tonight, and they can be general guidelines for when you're determining how many of each plant you want to put in your designs. The first one we call plant massing. This is really kind of like a standard method of design where you want to make sure you have clumps of, say, 3, 5, or 7 plants of one particular species. In this picture, there's a lot of purple coneflower in a clump. There's the black-eyed Susans near it. So it's really easy for you to identify what's what. This is recommended as opposed to planting one plant over here and then one purple coneflower here and one purple coneflower over there. Because the next spring, when all the plants start coming out of the ground, you're not going to know what is the difference between what you planted and what is a weed. And so it's very helpful to, if you clump them together and you note that you look there and you think, okay, all of these 7 plants look really similar. So I think this is probably what I planted. And this one coming up that doesn't look the same, the odd man out, that might be a weed. And so that can help you in your maintenance of these projects especially if some of these species aren't familiar to you. So you're not familiar what their baby plants look like. When they come up next year, you're not really sure what's what. Planting them in a clump gives you a really clear visual to follow when you're trying to determine, did I plant that or are those weeds coming up? So this can be beautiful and can help provide kind of an ease of maintenance down the road. These also provide big groupings of flowers for forage for pollinators. So that's helpful. They can come and find a particular type of nectar and pollen in one space and be able to feed for a while there. So that's great. The one thing to remember is don't forget to plant something that blooms in spring, summer, and fall. So we know that pollinators need that forage and nectar all season long. So you want to make sure that you're picking a grouping that blooms something that's starting in April, something else is blooming May and June, and then throughout the rest of the year. So a little bit of planning goes into this type of design. This can be also easily accomplished in shady places. We have a lot of fantastic woodland understory species in Minnesota, so don't shy away from putting your Lawns to Legumes project in a shady place if that's what you have in your yard. You can definitely participate if you have a shady site. These are a few examples of bloodroot, ladyfern, mayapple, wild ginger, wild geranium, all of which are fantastic shade species. And using that plant massing design can be really, really beautiful. One thing to know about shady locations is a lot of our native understory flowers or native understory plants evolve to flower before the trees leaf out. So shade gardens often kind of have their moment in the spring. But if you do a little bit of research, you can pick a number of later season species to add to a shade planting as well, such as zigzag goldenrod, big-leaved aster. These are fantastic so that you're still providing pollinator forage and nectar late into the season in a shady garden. The next design style that I want to share with you all is matrix plantings. Matrix plantings can be very useful in a large area. And we have an example of a matrix planting in a boulevard here, and they're also very helpful in boulevards. A matrix planting works primarily by planting a grid of grasses and sedges. What that does is, especially in large areas or boulevards where you have a lot of just like weed competition, there could be salt from the road. Boulevards are notoriously challenging areas to grow plants. So providing this matrix of grasses and sedges, you begin to sort of cover that ground plane initially of mulch so that you outcompete weedy species that want to come in. So it helps sort of push competition so that weedy species aren't able to really come up between all these really densely planted grasses and sedges. And then, of course, because we're providing pollinator habitat, you want to intersperse that with scattered flowering native plants like you can see here. And I will say, later in the presentation, Jennifer's about to show you all some of our design templates, and we even have one for that matrix planting if that's what you're interested in. One of the things I would really recommend is putting some type of edging around your planting. Having it be up against a sidewalk, that's an edge. If it's up against lawn, have something that keeps the line between the planting and the lawn clean. It really helps with your maintenance down the road. And we'll say over time, mulch will tend to spill into your lawn. Your lawn will tend to creep into your planting, and it can just make your maintenance regime a little bit challenging. If you add some type of edging, it can be anything, recycled bricks, pavers. We use metal edging. I don't love plastic edging, if I'm being honest with you. I think plastic edging, it can be good at keeping the lawn out. It tends to heave a lot and move around and pop up. So from an aesthetic perspective, I don't love the plastic edging, but it is definitely an option. Um, so having some type of edging between your planting is just going to help your maintenance down the road, and it's going to provide that clean edge against which your plantings are like, show up against. And so that can be really important in being a cue for care. So it lets your neighbors know, hey, I have this really intentional planting here. I'm doing this really very focused thing. I have this clean edging around it. These native plants may look a little bit different from other landscaping, but this is really intentional. And this edging is helping to show that is your intention. Lastly, signage really does show your intention as well. So that can be really helpful. You can communicate to your neighbors what you're doing. And it's a great conversation starter. So folks are like, hey, I see you working really hard out here to pull your lawn up. What are you doing? And you've got some signage there to talk about it. You can talk about the program. Maybe that's something they're interested in doing as well. It's a really nice way to build community. All right, and Jennifer's going to tell you about some of the different pollinator or lawns to legumes project types.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, so there's a few different project types that you can approach your L2L funds with. Pocket plantings being one of them. So essentially that means small plantings where you can bite off a little chunk that will make it a very manageable amount for your time, your lifestyle, that kind of thing. Go ahead, Alexandra. Thank you. So some things to consider. It's, it makes it more manageable and it's easier to care for, just as Jen was talking about. But the layout, before you put them in the ground, think about how you're going to space things. Pocket plantings are, by definition, tidy and small. And so if you think about how that's going to look at the end of your project, it'll kind of help you plan out where things are all going to be from the beginning. It also helps to really protect your soil from erosion. So you know how much mulch you're going to need, and that will, inform where your project is going. So here's some of the templates of that. If you're thinking about the sizing, it could be as small as, 75, but yeah, they could be even smaller depending on what you're trying to work with. Every property is a little bit different, and, even just a few little plantings here or there will get you started. Your pollinator friends will thank you. So this particular design template only has, just less than 50 plants there. So it can be a really easy way to start, 11 by 8 specifically in size. So it really can be a small amount just to jump off. This one is a shade garden. So this one's a little bit bigger. It's about 150 square feet. And this one goes closer to your 75 plants amount, but if you think 11 by 16 or something like that in sizing, it could be many different shapes. It doesn't have to be the oval, but if you apply this according to what your aesthetics are, it can easily be a really nice starter size as well. And then these are the plant lists. So all of these are on the Bowser website. The Board of Soil and Water Quality Resources. And so that, this one on the left is kind of the matrix style, but it's for sunny and low pollinators. And there's also a lot of different types of plants that can be subbed in. So if you're not specifically going towards this plant list, you can also think about similar species that go in similar places. The one on the right is geared towards the shade garden. So a couple ideas there. And here's their understory template for, yes, thank you, Jen. Sunny and low template is great for boulevards. We have dry understory for pollinators that are great for larger trees, or the right one here, the modern grid planting, is also matrix style. So that refers back to that matrix plan. And lots of different ideas there for species. So this is some boulevard plantings. As Jen mentioned, these are notoriously difficult sites. So there's some really good plant lists here of species that should thrive in that particular situation. Every site is a little bit different, but it's a good stepping off point. Just part sun, full shade, full sun, all available as just food for thought. Another type of planting that you can look at for your project is rain gardens. There's a few things to consider in that, like placement, where that stormwater is coming from, how you're going to get that installation installed, because there's a little bit more digging involved. There's a little bit more physical labor in moving that soil. And also how those plants interact with the different times of inundation with how much water is coming in. So here's kind of a quick synopsis of what a rain garden looks like. And there are a lot of DIY, just like walk you through resources available online. But the big point is having a flat space on the bottom. So that means going in with a level and making sure that the water can be captured in the entire basin. Not just a portion of it, but like making sure that water can stay for that 24 to 48 hours at most time period, so that that water can get into the ground with the help of the native plants and their capillary action of the roots. The rain gardens also need an intentional outlet, so be very mindful of where the overflow might happen when we get a rainstorm that is really high volume, like what we've seen the past few years. When that overflow inevitably does happen, where does that overflow point let out? You want that to be guiding that water back out to your street. If you can, follow the path that was originally there, away from your foundation and away from your house. Another big piece, speaking of foundations, try to stay at least 10 feet away from your foundation or your basement. That will keep that capillary action underground from the water flowing back towards your house. You want to capture that runoff safely so that it's not causing any type of hazards on your property. So don't have it run over your sidewalk if you can, or things like that to consider. Avoid digging under tree roots. Typically, we'll try to go out at least 10 feet, if not more, to help those roots stay safe. So you're not affecting the canopy over time and the tree health. And then, of course, always go for one when you're talking about digging for a rain garden. Typically, in a residential setting, you're only looking at about 6 inches depth, but even that, especially like your communication utilities are very shallow, and so make sure you are calling Go for One or 811 to know where your utilities are. Another option, pollinator meadows. So it's essentially your pocket pollinator gardens, but bigger. So repeat that over a larger space. So that can be, having a template of a small pocket planting, but then literally taking that and duplicating that over a larger space over time. So here's kind of an example of that. So yeah, they're just a more expansive area with a little bit more diversity, kind of emulating what a prairie might look like in our not too distant past. But yeah, put it side by side over time, take it bit by bit, and that can slowly create that pollinator meadow for you. The biggest piece of this, use smaller plant plugs or seeds to cover more area for the same cost. Because you are taking a bigger chunk of your yard, it can get a little more costly up front if you try to take it all at once. And so that's where like having it chunk by chunk might be a little easier budget wise. You can check your local suppliers for native seed or seed mixes. And then you could follow, a lot of those have specific instructions for those seed mixes that can help you apply those. Just be mindful, some of those seed mixes, some of them have a very specific seeding time. Some of them are better in the fall, some of them are better in the spring. So just try to keep an eye out for what some of those recommendations are. Also, something to be mindful of, if you are trying to grow from seed, it will take a few years to fully establish. The viability of seed, over time depends on a lot of things. How old the seeds are, not only, the conditions as they go down. There's a lot of things that inform how a seed is successful as it grows. And so from the beginning, expect that it will probably take a few seasons to get fully established to look like what this picture example is. And then finally, as you're doing all of that, consider erosion and how that's going to work on your site. Sometimes the bit by bit process helps control that as opposed to taking off a lot of lawn or a lot of existing plants, just to, you have that impact and you want to make sure that you can keep your erosion under control. But if you are going to take on that bigger project, see if you can get friends or family to help you get it turned over quickly so you don't have to worry about that erosion piece. And then another big piece of the project possibilities is trees and shrubs. Makes a big difference in your new lawn or how it affects your environmental aspects for your house. So they're really wonderful pieces in the environment. So a few things to consider with placing trees and shrubs. They're a big investment, so they will mature over a long period of time, and you want to consider how that plant, that tree, or that shrub is going to grow over the years. Don't put it too close to your foundation. Don't get it close to utilities, those kind of things. It does end up impacting over the course of that tree's life. So not only that, but like the site conditions, are they going to get enough sun? Are they going to get enough soil moisture and where you're putting it? A lot of trees and shrubs have the same needs as what your smaller plants do. And so, think about that as you start putting those larger pieces in. Especially those power lines and utilities. We've all driven down the street and seen those poor trees that have been put right underneath a utility line. And if you want to really preserve the look of that tree, try to look up as well as down and across your yard as you're planning. Walkways as well as privacy can all influence where you want to put a tree or a shrub too. Walkways in particular, it'll affect the root systems, and the root systems will also affect the sidewalks. And so it's a combination of those things to kind of think about. Views and privacy, shrubs and trees are a great way of creating new spaces in your yard. And so if you want to think about any type of privacy or any type of creating a new room in your yard, or a new feeling for that new campfire or anything like that. It's a really great way to make a fast impact in your new planting. Oh, on my toes. So going back to the utility piece. So this is what you're probably going to see as you call Gopher 1. If you know your code colors, that will tell you what's going on underground and where to avoid when you're doing your digging. Sewer is typically your purple and as well as your irrigation and reclaimed water. So there's, okay, I'll back up. When you're doing your project, start with your white flags. That's where your new project, you're telling the utility marking company where your new project is going to go. When they come out, they're going to then mark exactly what's in your site. And that the ones you really want to watch for are the red, the yellow, and the orange, because you typically will see those impacting what your project might be. Red is electrical, for obvious reasons. You don't want to hit those. Yellow gas, that is an emergency if you hit those. So, keep an eye on that one. And communication, we all rely on those internet lines anymore, working from home or even just enjoying our day to day. And so those orange lines especially are very shallow. And so those flags in particular are ones to watch out for. Some of the ones that they will not mark for you are sprinkler systems, private electrical, if you've added any lighting somewhere, or dog fencing. Those are frequently ones that will not be marked by Gopher 1. And so those are ones that you'll want to look through your house records or contact an irrigation company if you know of their installation to really be informed about what's in your yard. All right, and the big piece in all of this and kind of summing that up is, we're looking for putting the right plants in the right place. So you can really influence what environmental impacts are on your house as you think about this too. Not only for, you've got the benefits for putting the right plant in the right place for the plants themselves, but you can also influence what your utility bills are going to be with where you put your plants. And so shade trees on the west side of the house are very beneficial for, those hot evening suns. Service berries in a rain garden, that can really help. Oh, sorry. A lot of kind of managing that runoff. Some of the examples on this particular sketch, they're using columnar trees to screen for the neighbors. Just kind of creating that privacy. And then shrubs at the fence line along the back softens the space and really defines what they're hoping for in their yard. And then evergreens on the northwest side of the house block some of the prevailing winds. So super helpful. When you go about planting trees, the biggest thing is make sure you are cutting the roots so that they can go in. You don't have those girdling roots over time. Dig a hole that's twice as big as that root ball so that they have plenty of room to grow. And then plant so that wherever your soil line was in that pot meets where the ground also comes in. So that's where the root flare typically is for your tree. You want that slightly above the soil so that you won't have any of that going up the stem of your tree and causing any type of mold or rot. And then you'll want to gently but firmly backfill the hole to reduce the air pocket so your little tree isn't moving side to side over time or sinking. And then mulching. As you add in mulch for your little trees, Be mindful of not doing a mulch volcano. That's where you introduce some of the pests or the mold at the base of the tree, and it makes it really hard over time. The best case scenario for mulching is you're looking at a donut shape as opposed to the volcano. So pull that mulch out a little ways from the base of the tree so that it has that breathing room. It will help hold the moisture in at the soil level while the tree is getting established, and it'll give it a lot more chance to thrive with all that moisture holding. And then some really great resources. Xerxes Society has some wonderful plant lists. Here's an example just of some key shrubs and trees for Minnesota, and how much they also support our local wildlife. There's some really wonderful resources there under their publications. All right, I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Thanks, Jennifer. I love seeing all these questions come into the chat. We are going to try and answer a number of those out loud so you all can hear those answers in person. And so please keep those coming. That's exciting. We're going to talk next about a really, really important piece, which I think can sometimes be neglected with native plants. I think a lot of folks think, oh, these are native plants. I'm just going to put them in the ground and they know what to do. They're good. I'm going to let it go. And that really doesn't help your planting get established. These are baby plants. And, it's your opportunity to establish a relationship with the land that you're on, to establish a relationship with the plants that you're going to be working with, and really learn about caring for those native plants, especially in what we were calling the establishment period, which is the first 2 to 3 growing seasons. So what does that look like? We're going to kind of walk you through some of the things to think about. If you're going to invest your time, you're going to invest money in this project, be prepared to care for it so that you really have the most successful project. So the first year of establishment might be kind of minimal growth, right? It might look like this. You've got your plants in the ground, and we'll talk a little bit about mulches. There was a question about mulch in the chat, which we can talk about a little bit. In this case, they're using wood mulch. These are small plants. There's a decent amount of space between them. What you're trying to do at this point is give these plants enough water to get established. It is very helpful if you can water these plants at least an inch per week. That could be your minimum. We'll give you some tips for that in a little bit. But also monitor the water coming from the sky. If it's raining and rains enough, great, save on that water bill. But do plan to be prepared to water. Don't head out of town on vacation for several weeks right after you plant your plants. Make sure you've got a plan to keep those watered. And it is really easiest to pull weeds when they're small. When they get bigger, it gets much harder. So just, walk around, get to know your plants, learn what's what, and you'll be able to note what's coming up that looks like a weedy species. There are some amazing apps now that can really help you identify those weedy species so you know what to pull up. And I think we have some notes in here about those. If not, I'll mention my favorite in a few minutes. So when should you water? Early in the morning is the best. It really helps to sort of give the plants the soaking they need before a long, hot day in the sun. If you can't water in the morning, you are a busy person. Life happens. Water in the evening, that's fine, and don't stress about it. Just do it when you can do it. The one thing I do want to say is helpful, though, is it's better to water longer and less frequently than just to stand there with a hose for like 5 minutes every day. The reason is if you stand there with a hose for 5 minutes every day, you're only wetting the top inch of soil. And then those plants are never incentivized to send their roots deeper into the soil to look after moisture. We want them to do that so that 2 years from now, they're more resilient to drought and they're reaching water deeper in the soil profile. So what you can do is sort of train them. You can put a sprinkler on or water by hand. I think it's helpful to use a sprinkler because then you can set a timer and you can know that you're watering for 45 minutes. But you're only going to do it every couple of days or every 3 days to let that moisture go deeper into the soil profile. You're giving it enough moisture so it gets deep in the soil profile, and you're really training those roots to go after that moisture. you can use some great tools to help you measure how much water you're applying. You might have heard me say 1 inch a week, and you're thinking, what is Jennifer talking about? How do I do that? Use a rain gauge, or you can use a tuna can, which is very helpful. You can set it near your sprinkler. You can let your sprinkler run, and you go out there and check, and you can say, okay, it took 30 minutes for that tuna can to fill up. I know it takes 30 minutes to apply an inch of water. And that's just a great starting point for you to make sure that you're providing sufficient water. If you water and pay really good attention to that, especially in the first year, the first growing season, right after you plant them, if you're very, very diligent, it can have a huge impact on your project, and it can really reduce the amount of water and the number of plants that you need to replant down the road. So you're really giving them the best chance. This may seem counterintuitive. What you're doing is really helping those plants get established so that 2-3 years from now, you're not having to water nearly as much. Can't emphasize this part enough. It's very, very helpful. How to know your plants. What's a weed and what are the plants that you put in the ground? There's a lot of tools you can use to help. You can use your plant labels. So when you're getting these plants, maybe you're using that plant massing that I talked about earlier. You're planting a group of 5 little blue stem together. They all look really similar. It's going to help you recognize them and get to know them. Talk to them. Have a conversation with your plants. Figure out what's what. We find that the biggest barrier to folks who are trying to make sure they're weeding their new plantings is they really don't know which is a weed and which is maybe one of the intentional plants they put into the ground. These are the apps. Will say that picture this, I have found to be the most accurate in helping you identify what's in your yard. And then you can use that to take a photo. It'll help you identify it. And then it might say considered weedy by most gardeners. And you can just Google that plant, look it up, and find a little bit more information about it. Minnesota Wildflowers is a great resource. You can put it in there and it might say, nope, not a native plant, or yep, a native plant, and it'll help you understand what's what. And we have MN Wildflowers done. I think it's mnwildflowers.org is the website. But I would just encourage you to use those apps. There's a great way to utilize kind of current technology in this way. And then it'll help you start to identify the plants that you put in the ground versus a weed. And if you get those weeds when they're small, boy, does it make your job easier down the road. Which one of these would you rather pull, right? This is like a Siberian elm tree, which is not considered native in our area. They are very prolific, very robust species. They can spread quite a bit. And these little tiny trees on the left here, they actually can be quite difficult to pull, even when they're only a few inches tall. And I always recommend waiting till after a rain event when the soil is moist to be able to pull those out. Or once they get to be in the picture in the middle, 2 or 3 feet tall, you might be using a root wrench or something like that to pull those out. Once they're a tree, that's a whole other monetary investment to removing them. So, spending a little time out there when the weeds are small is very helpful. I tend to just take short visits to my garden to pull out weeds. It might be in the evening and I just have a little time to walk around. I don't have a lot, but I've got a little bucket that I keep outside and I just pull up the weeds that I happen to see. I don't have to do my whole yard. It's just what I can do at that time. And I think those short, frequent visits can help you get to know your plants and help you help your maintenance just be easy and not feel like a big task that you have to do for a full day on a weekend. So incorporating that into your lifestyle can help you maintain these more easily over time. The second year of establishment can look like this. You really watered your plants a lot. They're establishing, they come back well, and they start to look nice and full. You're starting to see more flowers on your plants. There's maybe a few bare spots, but the plants are filling in. And it might mean you're weeding a little bit less because your plants that you planted have kind of taken up more space. So there are some great, it kind of gives you an idea of what to expect as you move through that process. And then the third year, you start to have a more established garden. It's very full. Your need for weeding, it goes down over time because you've done such a great job those first 2 years and you've watered so well, your plants are established. They look really, really nice and full. Some ongoing land care practices. If you don't subscribe to weeding 5 minutes every day like I do, then I want to impress upon you these 3 key dates. Make sure you get out there and weed your new planting by at least Memorial Day, July 4th, and Labor Day. The reason is any weedy species in your yard, say you have thistle in your yard, once it goes to seed and spreads seed in your yard, you have that many more thistle that you have to pull out. So it's really important to make sure you pull out any weedy species before they go to seed, flower and go to seed. And so that's really key is to, if you don't have a ton of time and you have 3 different weeds, we'll focus on the one that's about to flower and get those out first. And that's going to help you in your maintenance practices down the road. We say these 3 times because there are warm season and cool season weeds, and they bloom at different times of the year. And so this is to help you focus on that. Mulch. We are not wanting you to have to sort of apply buckets and truckloads of mulch to your garden every single year. The one thing we want to note is that it is very helpful, especially during the establishment period. Over time, you've seen these beautiful full gardens and you don't really see the mulch anymore. Great, don't apply any more mulch. What it can help with really is that establishment to keeping that soil moisture in the ground, right when the plants are new. And then if you have some erosion, if you have some areas that are slightly problematic, maybe they're kind of bare, you're getting stuff established, refresh the mulch if you need to, but I'm not advocating for piling up 6 inches of mulch over time. That's really shouldn't be necessary in projects like this. Of course, you can move your plants around. Once they get big and full, great, you've got your own nursery. And if you want to make another native planting or another pocket planting, as Jennifer suggested, you can do that. You can divide them, transplant them, add a few new ones. These are great opportunities. You can also share plants with your neighbors, right, who are putting in pocket plantings and pollinator plantings. That's a great way to share some of those native plants. I think it's a fantastic way to help build community and helping your neighbor establish their own pollinator garden. One thing I want to talk about briefly before we end is how to maintain your garden in terms of trimming it back. And this is a big question that we get. We really like to advocate for waiting until the spring to trim back plants. I know it can be very common in Minnesota. We all get very excited in the fall. We like to rake up all our leaves, put them away, cut back all the plants, and like it's done. We'll talk about winter maintenance in a couple of slides, but really going to encourage you to go take a hike in the fall and don't worry about quite so much maintenance in the fall because leaving some of those native plants standing all winter long provides a lot more habitat for native pollinators. We have a lot of stem nesting pollinators who use those sort of hollow stemmed plants like maybe bee balm or Joe Pye weed to dig in there, and that's where they're living all winter long. When we cut all that vegetation down and put it in our yard waste, they don't really have a place to stay. So if you're creating pollinator habitat with your planting, you want to create that all year long. That means leaving your plants all winter. They look really pretty with snow on them anyway, so just leave it and wait. You can cut them back in the spring, but wait until the average soil temperature is around 50 degrees. One way you can tell that is when you start to just sort of generally see dandelions blooming in your area. That's an indication that the soil temperature has warmed up and that most of our pollinators have emerged from the soil or emerged from the plants in which they're living. You can cut them back to just 18 inches. So if you leave 18 inches standing, then those bare stems can be habitat for pollinators. 30% of Minnesota bees are stem nesting species. So then you're providing habitat for those species. Prepping your planting for winter. Don't do so much. That's our biggest advice. Leave your plants up. Don't cut them back because you know you're going to do that in the spring. And then another thing to consider is, not feeling like you have to rake up your leaves quite so much either. I think actually I'll wait. We have another slide about that coming. Thanks, Alexandra. Prepping your planting for winter. It's great if you can leave the leaves in your planting. We were talking a lot about soil health and about organic matter, and then leaving some leaves turn into organic matter. So they are really going to decompose and add organic matter to your soil. You can leave them in your garden. You don't have to leave them all over your car. You don't have to leave them all over your driveway. And I totally understand it might make sense to remove those from your yard. But maybe they fall on your lawn. And in that case, you just rake them into your garden bed. And then it's providing not only organic matter that will eventually decompose, but it's also providing some cover for your new plants. It's very possible that we get a very cold snap before we have much snow on the ground. That's happened the past couple of years. And what that does by leaving those leaves on top of your new plants, it's helping to insulate them. So they're trying to make it through the first winter, and sometimes you have up to 10% die off every year. So you want to provide some of that insulation, especially for your new plantings, and you can cover them with leaves. You'll see in places like the rose garden in the city of Minneapolis parks, they actually pile leaves over those roses to provide that insulation going into winter. And this is essentially doing the same. If you decide to mow the leaves on your lawn areas, you can do that. Sometimes you can mow the leaves if you have a bagging mower that are on your lawn, you can mow it and use those chopped up leaves. You can add them to your compost pile. You can add them to your garden beds to provide essentially like a mulch that just comes right from your yard and adds mulch to your yard. We have a lot of our moth species that roll up and overwinter in leaves. So when we rake all the leaves away, we're sending away, Luna moths, fireflies, all of these moths and butterflies that you're seeing in this picture on the right. So it's just another reason to leave some leaves in your yard to help create that habitat. Alexandra, do you want me to talk about this one or have you got this?
No, I've got it. I just
Okay.
lost my mute button for a minute. So what I just want to share, and we've kind of been sharing throughout this whole presentation, is this is a lot of information, and we totally understand that. And knowing that, we've put together a lot of resources that you can refer to anytime you want throughout the course of this project to help you feel confident and have the information you need to complete it. So this workshop is recorded and will be shared with everyone to revisit as you feel necessary. On the Blue Thumb website, we have the native nursery or the nurseries list that sells native plants. Not all of them sell exclusively native plants, but we have a lot of partners across the state who have started adding more and more sections in their nurseries for Lawns to Legumes grantees. There are those design templates that Jennifer went through, as well as even more design templates available on our website, plant lists, and then, like we've said before, the grantee guide and the hive are both really great places to check in on, especially if you have a new question that comes up throughout the process. Check the grantee guide there first to see if it's been answered. And then if it hasn't, feel free to join the hive and send the question into that community there for either a coach, a staff member, another grantee who's maybe dealing with the same thing to either answer or at least commiserate with you on. We really want this to be a collaborative process for everyone, and we're available anytime to help. So with that, having given Jen and Jennifer a moment to maybe take a drink of water and breathe a little, we want to go ahead and jump straight into the Q&A. So I don't know do you all have a preference on if I read the questions out to you, Jen or Jennifer? Or, okay, I see a shrug. I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to start pulling some of the questions I see here, and you can take them as you see fit. So Susan asked, what do you recommend when your soil is clay? How do you decompact that soil?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's often a perception that like clay is bad. And I want to change that perception. Clay soils actually have a lot of nutrients in them. So as opposed to sand, which is a low nutrient soil. So there's a lot of nutrients in soil for plants to grow. With clay, the one thing you just want to do is just be careful not to disturb it as much. Clay just compacts easier. There's fewer air spaces between those clay particles. And so you can do the same type of decompacting that I described. You can use a shovel to turn it over. You can use a pitchfork to put some holes in there. But the thing that is really going to be helpful in clay soil is just adding some organic matter to the soil. So adding that organic matter is going to help the plants decompact it over time. And the other key with clay soil is just not to work in it a lot, like turn it and do a lot with it when it's wet. That's when it is the most susceptible to compaction. So you want to let it be Doesn't have to be dry as a bone, but just like evenly moist, not right after a rain, let it dry out a little bit. Clay soil, you really just want to make sure if you have clay soil and you're thinking about doing a rain garden, what's important is thinking about rain garden design for clay soils. That can be challenging. Clay soils can't infiltrate as much water as sand or silt. And so you want to be a little bit more strategic about placing your rain garden in clay soil. You actually want to make it shallower as opposed to deeper because you want the water, it can basically infiltrate slower, and you want water to be able to get down below the surface of the soil within 24 to 48 hours. So by being shallower, you really are decreasing the volume that has to be infiltrated into the soil. So just a couple tips for clay soil.
Wonderful. The next question here is from Sylvia. What is green mulch and what kinds are there for the project?
Jennifer, jump into just and I always have lots of things I love to talk about. Green mulch can really be, I think Sylvia is who I think asked this question, is referring to more like a seeded mulch, like it could be something like clover, or like a living mulch. And so instead of putting down a wood mulch, some folks will put down a native seed mulch, and oftentimes that's often clover is used as a living mulch. And that's a great possibility. It has a different aesthetic to it. So as long as you're okay with that, kind of the look, it can have clover coming up around baby plants and kind of be a little bit more to manage. That's okay if that works for you. And then just making sure anytime you're establishing anything by seed, it just takes a little longer. And it may, if it's a very sloped area, you just don't want in a heavy rain to have this bare soil and newly spread seed to wash away quickly. So just be mindful. I would say seed establishes better on a flatter area.
Wonderful. Thank you. The next question we have from Becca is, we are in Duluth and there are certain are there certain plants listed in some of the templates and things that you talked about that would not do well this far north? Or is there a way to figure that out in the plant finder? What's going to do best regionally?
Did you?
Let's see, I know the plant finder does have a lot of ways to filter the material the plant lists that you could bring off of that information. So if you just go to that website and filter for your zone, that can easily create some options for you. There are a lot of, that said, there are a lot of resources around the Duluth area as well. And so it could be reaching out to the master gardeners in that area. It could be, adapt for your site, definitely. The University of Minnesota has a lot of information on that, but then also the various different plant finders out there also have a lot of ways to get those plant lists down to where you are.
Thank you so much. Kim asked, for rain gardens in the boulevard, I've seen some that are not sloped, but rather consistent 2 to 4 inches deep throughout the whole space. What are the pros and cons of this type of garden?
Yeah, they can be constructed both ways. Boulevards are really narrow, obviously. Sometimes they're only 3 or 4 feet wide. And if you have a slope, a side slope, and then a basin, and then it slopes back up, there's just not as much volume to be able to infiltrate that runoff. And so they can be constructed both ways. Both are helpful. If they are simply 2 to 4 inches deep straight across within the boulevard, kind of bound by the concrete sidewalk and the curb, that's one possibility. In our work, one of the things that we have found is if you construct them that way, people often will roll their ankle on the side, like kind of semi-stepping into that boulevard. So in order to make it, sidewalks are a high traffic area, people are walking their dogs. So we have found that having a side slope or like a bench from the sidewalk down to the basin of the boulevard rain garden has prevented people from kind of tripping off the side of the sidewalk. It's more common than you think.
It's a really important consideration, so thank you for that. Mackenzie then asked, can a sump pump run into a rain garden?
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really wanted to answer this question out loud because there's like, as Jennifer and I have both experienced, there's a lot of nuance with this. So yes, a sump pump can definitely run into a rain garden. Um, One thing that is really important in our experience is that you're really mindful of how much water comes out of your sump pump. And so you really need to pay attention and spend some time. Does your sump pump run every 5 minutes? Is there that much water coming out of it? If there is, and you put it into a rain garden that's only, 10 by 15, 150 square feet, it is likely that you're going to overwhelm that amount of soil and it will not be able to infiltrate that volume of water. There are some sump pumps that run once or twice a day. Now remember, a sump pump is pumping essentially out of a 5-gallon bucket. So in the basement, there is like a equivalent of about 5 gallons that comes out every time the sump pump runs. And so if your sump pump is running not too frequently, then yes, that usually can work in a rain garden. If your sump pump is running all the time, and I've been to plenty of houses where it can run really, really consistently, and oftentimes, unfortunately, that volume of water is really too much to be caught within a smaller rain garden. And you can have just really standing water in your yard, which obviously you don't want. So it is possible, but just really there's some nuance to it, and hire a designer or have somebody come out if you're just not sure. So there's just some careful considerations there I wanted to make sure I mentioned.
All right. Cynthia then asked, I want to plant in an area that floods after a heavy rain. It usually has standing water for 1 to 3 days, depending on the amount of rain. Would that be considered a rain garden?
Yes and no. It is essentially functioning as a rain garden. However, it is also a risk for just being a standing pool. So, if you're looking at something that's holding water for up to 3 days, that is no longer a rain garden that is infiltrating. Like it is essentially a pond. And you're looking at risks for breeding ground for mosquitoes, and other pests. If you are wanting to plant in that area, typically what we've recommended is going towards species like shrubs that can handle that kind of inundation over a long period of time. It's like your dogwoods or, things that will be able to handle that inundation. Jen, do you have other examples of good species for that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, maybe some like sedges. We have fox, if it's sunny, fox sedge is really nice to like help cover the base of a wet area. And I think planting the native plants in that wet area can be good, right? Whether it's technically called a rain garden or not, I think what really is important is like species selection for that type of space. And those shrubs do make it a lot easier to maintain. So yeah, I agree 100%, Jennifer. Maybe something like dwarf bush honeysuckle would be another, Diarvilla lonicera would be another shrub species I'd recommend.
Next question we have now is looking at pollinator meadows. How do you, or do you, suggest weeding a pollinator meadow?
Yeah, so pollinator meadows take a little bit of a different maintenance regime. Some of that depends on whether you're starting by seed or by plugs. And so if you're starting by seed, the maintenance for a pollinator meadow is a little different. It's just generally too big to, hand weed a space that large if you're looking at putting in something like a meadow. A lot of seeded plantings in that way start by mowing. And so it doesn't look great for the first couple of years, but what that means is that in the first year of growth, you need to mow it, but you have to mow it kind of high. So typically a hand pushed lawnmower doesn't get high enough. You really want to mow it at like 6 or 8 inches tall. What that does is that's cutting down any weeds that are in the planting and preventing them from going to flower and going to seed. And so if you go ahead and mow, that can help reduce the weed competition. It is also going to cut down your native plants at the same time. That really helps them focus their energy into the roots. So it's a little bit longer process, but if you continually make sure you mow that for the first 2 to 3 growing seasons, you can establish a stronger base for your seeded pollinator meadow.
Thank you. Clee asked, if I already have hardwood chips, can I mix them in with the shredded mulch somehow?
Yes, the answer to that one is yes. You, as long as you're okay with the aesthetic of the mat of the mix, you can easily put the mat of your shredded mulch over the top, and that way it'll actually help hold some of that other chip mulch in place.
Great. Lauren asked, in referencing to cutting your native plants back in the spring, do you have to cut them back, or can you just let everything stand?
You don't have to cut them back. I mean, they were evolved to not have people cutting them back, so they will be fine if you don't cut them back. Most people choose to for aesthetic reasons, but you don't have to.
Thank you. We've got a couple of people who are doing some plantings along either like a road or a sidewalk where lots of folks and especially dog walkers like to travel. And they're curious about protecting plants from dog urination. Is that something they should be paying attention to, or is it a less harmful thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it can really, if dogs like to pee in one spot and then they all like to pee in that same spot, right? And so if they pick a spot and it's on your plants, then your plants are getting a lot of urea in one time, and it can be damaging to them. One of the techniques we have recently started using in some plantings where they have a lot of dog walkers is like designating a like gravel pee area for dogs and then having someone try to please get their dog to pee in that one specific area so they all go right there and not on the plants. Almost like, okay, we know what's going to happen. Here's some like, a little gravel spot, and we're kind of like trying to keep the dog pee there instead of all throughout the plantings. I mean, of course, you can put a little fence up, you can put some signage up, and I think that's really going to help people know what you're doing and be respectful of the plantings. Of course, you can't always control your dog, so trying to like have your dog have a little designated place can be helpful in preventing them from going in the rest of the area. We actually called it like a pea rock in one of our plantings and put that there. And then that really kind of focused their where they decided to go to the bathroom.
Love that. A huge proponent, as someone with a lot of dogs, huge proponent of a pea rock. It's basically like the publishing newspaper house for your dog. They're going to sniff it and write their own news right there. Next question, which is really plaguing quite a few people, I'm sure, is any tips for managing or preventing high volume volunteer seedlings? We've got folks with maple, elm trees, aspen, cottonwoods, all dealing with this problem.
Yeah, that's hard. I just want to acknowledge that's tough. Any tips? Gosh, and some years it feels like all the elms or all the maples just have so many seedlings that it can be a lot to pick up. I had a couple of years ago, we have a neighbor has a Siberian elm like the one I showed you that creates so many seedlings. And there was one year, it was just like, wow, they're expecting a bad winter. There are so many seeds that came up that following spring. And again, it was like me going out there when they were small and just like pulling them out by handfuls. I didn't even bother to put them in. I just like, as soon as you pull them out, you don't have to make sure that you get it in some kind of yard waste bag. You just pull them out where they were and they're going to decompose on the ground. They're not going to reseed. That can be hard in something like a big pollinator meadow. That's where that mowing comes into place to help cut those back so they don't become bigger over time. After a rain, somebody put in the chat, for sure when it's moist. it was like just going out there and trying to get big handfuls at a time. Do you have any other suggestions, Jennifer? That's a tough one.
Yeah, we have a crabapple that drops all the apples every year, and we get the little seedlings as well as the maple trees. And our method has been like going through with the mower, and just kind of taking off the tops of them so that that growth, you can't get to it. Like you're depleting the plant's ability to get any of that sunlight to the rest of it, and at a very young stage. And so that will take care of a lot of those little seedlings. However, it's not going to get all of them. And so there will still be some hand pulling a little bit later. But that's the method that we've kind of used, is going through with the mower first, or a weed whacker, or whatever's more accessible for that site.
I also just personally want to plug the use of like a stirrup hoe too. Those can also be really helpful. So you're not like on your hands and knees in an area with a lot of little short seedlings. You can like push back and forth really quick and get a lot of them pulled up. It's my favorite weeding tool in my garden shed.
That's
Uh,
great.
Um, Jesse asked, if I don't have time to water in the morning, is it okay to water in the evening?
Yeah, it totally is. Yeah, it's just fine. Do it when you can do it. Just watering is better than not. So don't stress about it. Do it when you can, and that's just fine.
Paula has a very like topical question since we were just talking about weeds. Where should weeds be placed? In the trash, in a weed pile, in your compost? Recommendations.
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a little bit of nuance around that. So, if you're in an area that has, so well, let me back up. If the weeds that you have pulled out have a lot of seeds in them, weed seeds, um, unless your compost at home gets really, really hot, I probably wouldn't put them in my home compost, because I know mine is a passive compost pile and doesn't necessarily get hot enough to kill those weed seeds before I then put that compost back on my vegetable garden, for example. So weeds that I pull out, that I put those in the yard waste. So the city has a way to heat those up, process those. They can go in yard waste. There are some, so anything like if I'm pulling out those little baby maple seedlings we were just talking about, I don't even put those in yard waste. I just let them lay on top of the ground next to my native plants. I figure they're going to turn back into organic matter right there on top of the soil. And I don't really bother moving those anywhere else. If I'm pulling out tons and tons of weeds, I likely put most of it in yard waste. There are some specific weeds within the state that are considered noxious weeds. The DNR has a list of what those noxious weeds are. Some of our noxious weeds there's a limit to what you can't put them in yard waste. They really don't want the yard waste to spread them in that way. That includes things like crown vetch would be considered a noxious weed. And so there are some restrictions on those. And you can always check the DNR website to be able to kind of figure out if what you have has any restrictions. I might even be able to put that in the chat real quick.
We have another question from Susan about dealing with a large area that has buckthorn, which feels like a never-ending battle to manage. Do you have any recommendations that don't introduce poison into the soil or nearby?
There's actually a new study that came out recently about cutting buckthorn at chest height, and basically defoliating it and leaving it there to die essentially. And then you can easily pull on that stem to pop it out of the ground after it has dried. It's found to have been a pretty successful method without introducing any type of pesticides or herbicides. And so if you Google that, I believe that's another option that's actually on the U of M website now.
Yeah. There's some great resources for non-chemical buckthorn removal and cutting, just like Jennifer mentioned, that are really valuable. And then I would say too, buckthorn seeds only persist in the soil for 5 years, which may sound like forever to you, but some weed seeds can persist for 20, 50 years. And so the good thing about buckthorn is that once you start to really take care of that in your property, those seeds that are on the soil are not going to continue to come up after a few years. And you can always target buckthorn are dioecious. They have a male and female species, so the ones that have the berries are the ones that you want to cut down first so that you don't have any more buckthorn coming up. So kind of focus your efforts on those first.
Awesome. We're going to end it with one last question tonight, which is kind of jumping back to rain gardens. I think this is Margaret. There's an area in my yard that borders my neighbor's lawn where their lawn slopes down towards my yard, and they water their lawn regularly, and often in the summer I find standing water in a certain site near this border. What would be a good planting approach here? Do I think of this like a rain garden? The soil is clay-like and compacted.
Yeah, I think thinking of it like a rain garden seems it's getting water from runoff or one type of or another, right? And so having some species that are gonna be okay with that, it might be like that sunny but kind of wet. Joe Pyeweed does great in that, like a heavier soil. Gosh, does it really attract the monarch butterflies? It's so beautiful. It's pretty tall, so that would be something to consider, but I think that could be a good species for that area. Can you think of any others, Jennifer? Maybe swamp milkweed.
Yeah. No, or the world milking. I guess it depends on how much sun you're getting in that space. And if you are okay with it being taller versus lower, that kind of brings, like, if you're having more of a clay content, that brings me back to, like, maybe is a shrub species appropriate there in the dogwoods, but something, it sounds like it's holding some water. And so my curiosity there would be like, how long is it holding water and does it have a way of still running off? Informing questions, I suppose.
Well, thanks for getting some initial ideas flowing on that. I want to go ahead and say we're like right at time, which is pretty incredible. And I really appreciate you all coming tonight. I'm just going to really quickly plug, we've got one more project type webinar next Tuesday at the same time from 6 to 7:30, and it's going to be on pollinator lawns. So if that's a project type that you're considering, we have a whole separate webinar about it that will be presented by James Wolfen, who works at Twin City Seed and is an expert on that project type. So we'll give lots of good information about installing it and dealing with any challenges along the way. He's great for that. So thank you so much to Jen and Jennifer for presenting tonight. Thank you all so much for coming. We look forward to seeing the projects that you'll all be submitting here in the spring.